Hook the money that isn't supposed to exist. What if I told you that most of the money running the modern world was never officially called money? No mint, no printing press, no announcement. And yet, it pays for wars, bailouts, welfare states, and entire governments. Here's the mystery. Governments insist they don't print money to fund spending. Central banks insist they don't finance governments directly. So why does debt keep growing forever without ever being repaid? Tonight, we're uncovering how governments monetize debt without ever calling it money. A process so normalized that most people don't even see it happening anymore. Setting the stage when money and debt were not the same thing. For most of history, money and debt were clearly different. Money was tangible. Gold, silver, coinage. Debt was a promise. Temporary, risky, and limited. If a king borrowed too much, lenders demanded higher interest or refused entirely. If a government defaulted, its reputation collapsed. Debt had consequences. But consequences are inconvenient for states, especially during wars. In the late 17th century, governments faced a problem. They needed massive funding, fast, and without constant tax revolts. The solution wasn't more gold. It was financial engineering. Origins when debt learned to what amassed in 1694. England created the Bank of England to finance war against France. Here's the twist. Instead of taxing citizens directly, the government borrowed from private investors. Those investors received government bonds, but those bonds didn't just sit in vaults. Banks used them as collateral. They traded them. They built credit on top of them. Debt started behaving like money. This was the first step in monetization without ever saying the word, because calling it money would have caused outrage. Calling it public debt sounded responsible. Other countries copied the model. Over time, government debt stopped being a liability that needed repayment and became a financial asset essential to the system. The rise central banks make. Official, quietly fast forward to the 20th century. World War I and World War II required spending on a scale never seen before. Gold couldn't keep up, so governments leaned on central banks. Under the Bretton Woods system, currencies were pegged to the US dollar and the dollar to gold. On paper, discipline remained. In reality, the system relied on trust and coordination. The US ran deficits, printed dollars, exported inflation. Foreign central banks accumulated US debt, not because it was ideal, but because it was necessary. Debt became reserves. Still, no one called it money. Then came 1971. When the US closed the gold window, money officially detached from scarcity. At that moment, debt monetization became structurally permanent. Mechanism, how debt became money without the label. Here's how the system works. Step by step, governments issue bonds to fund spending. Banks and institutions buy those bonds. Central banks accept those bonds as safe assets. Central banks buy bonds during crises. New reserves are created electronically. No printing press, no physical cash. But purchasing power enters the system. The key trick. Debt is treated as if it were money, but remains legally classified as debt. This avoids political backlash. Money printing sounds dangerous. Bond purchases sounds technical. Same effect. Different language. The breaking point minus 2008 made IT impossible to ignore. The 2008 financial crisis exposed the system's dependency on monetized debt. Banks were drowning in bad assets. Governments were over-leveraged. Markets froze. Central banks stepped in. They didn't just lower rates. They bought government bonds and toxic assets at massive scale. This was quantitative easing. Monetization on an industrial level. Trillions of dollars appeared as central bank reserves. Officially, it wasn't money printing. Unofficially, it funded deficits, stabilized banks, and propped up asset prices. Debt had fully crossed the line. Fallout emergency becomes normal policy. After 2008, the playbook changed forever. Zero interest rates lasted over a decade. Balance sheets never shrank meaningfully. Debt exploded. Governments learned a new lesson. They could spend now and let central banks absorb the consequences later. Pandemic spending confirmed this. Trillions were issued in bonds. Central banks bought them. Inflation followed. But years later, debt monetization became invisible infrastructure, and because it didn't look like money printing, it avoided resistance. Failed fixes. Why the system can't go back? Some argue for tightening policy. Others suggest balance sheet reduction. But every attempt runs into the same wall. The system is addicted. Raising rates stresses governments. Reducing balance sheets crashes markets. Ending monetization triggers defaults. There is no clean exit, because debt is no longer temporary. It's structural. Modern parallels, the pattern is global today. Global debt exceeds $300 trillion. Central banks hold massive portions of government bonds. Markets depend on constant liquidity. Inflation resurfaces after long delays. Every cycle looks the same. Crises, debt, monetization, stability. Bigger crises. The scale grows. The language stays polite. Conclusion: what this really means. 3 takeaways. First, governments didn't eliminate money printing. They rebranded it. Second, debt monetization shifts costs into the future, not away. Third, calling something debt doesn't stop it from functioning like money. A warning systems built on delayed consequences feel stable until they aren't. When trust breaks, labels won't matter. Money will be questioned again. An open thought: if debt already functions as money, what happens when people stop believing it will be repaid? And who absorbs the loss when belief runs out? If you want more deep dives into money, debt, and the hidden mechanics of power, subscribe. Because the most important changes in finance happen quietly, before anyone gives them a name.